Hello everybody and welcome back to another video in my series on the Roman world and Christianity. Hope you guys are doing well out there. In today's video, we're going to talk about the legacy of Greco-Roman culture and how that specifically came to define what we consider to be Western civilization. So where we left off, believe it or not, we have already gone through 13 videos on the Roman world and Christianity, right? We tracked the beginning of the Roman Republic, its expansion into the Roman Empire. We discussed life in the Roman civilization, including the people and the society. We discussed the rise of Christianity, including its origins and its spread throughout the empire. And then finally, in the last three videos, we talked about the split of Rome and the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Now, in my final two videos on this series, we are going to be discussing the legacy that Roman civilization left behind. The next video that I'm going to post tomorrow will deal specifically with elements that were really specific to Rome, right, and its people and its empire and what they left behind. But in this video, we're going to talk about that combination of Greek and Roman society and how those work together to form what we really consider to be Western civilization and what that concept means. So as I discussed in previous videos, the Romans would go on to conquer lands surrounding the Italian peninsula and expand throughout the entire Mediterranean basin. Their empire unified hundreds of cultures across Europe, North Africa, and Western Asia. And when they unified these cultures, the Romans often brought with them certain elements of their culture, certain elements of their government and their society. And those would stick around as legacies throughout the entire Roman Empire and even into today. Now, of all the places that the Romans included in their empire, probably the most influential on the Romans themselves would be the Greeks. All right. Remember we said when Rome was first founded, Greeks were living on the Italian peninsula, Greek colonists, and they had many interactions with those early Romans, and it was from these Greeks that the Romans adopted their system of writing as well as their early system of religion. And as Rome continued to grow and expand, they would conquer the lands that were formerly independent Greek city-states, but they would really begin to adapt to a lot of Greek culture. There were some historians who put it that, metaphorically, the Romans conquered the Greeks, but culturally, the Greeks conquered the Romans. And that's what we really refer to when we discuss this idea of Greco-Roman culture. It's that blending of Roman, Greek, and Hellenistic cultures. Now, when we think of that term, Hellenistic, remember Greeks referred to themselves as Hellenes, and we discussed the idea of the Hellenistic era was when Alexander the Great took his Greek armies and conquered a lot of the lands of Western Asia. And with that, you had this blending of Greek and Asian cultures. So again, Greco-Roman was just this interesting mix of all Italian and Greek and Near Asian cultures, all of these different ideas blending together into one. And it was most strongly reflected in Roman literature, art, and philosophy. So when you put these ideas together, these ideas that kind of form the underlying foundations of a society, the Greco-Roman culture really led to what we consider to be Western civilization. Those lands of the former Roman Empire, so when we consider Europe, North Africa, even parts of the Middle East, we consider those to be Western societies. And then the lands that those lands would go on to conquer in the future, like parts of North America and Australia, we also consider those to be part of Western civilization. Now, there are certain underlying aspects that we consider to be Western, such as representative democratic government, right? So that had its origins in Athens, in Greece, but the Romans adopted that well in their Roman Republic, representative democracy. You also have these Greek philosophic ideas, so the ideas laid down by men like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. Then you also have it reflected in their ideas of literature. and religion as well. And when we think about religion, most notably you think about those Abrahamic religions and their influence on Western society. Remember, Abrahamic religions would include, and I'll do some drawings here, Judaism, Christianity, and then later on we will begin to study a little bit on Islam is also included in those Abrahamic religions. All right, so one of the elements where the Romans were very, very strongly influenced by the Greeks was in this world of fine arts. Now, to be honest, the Romans aren't really very well known for their artistic expression, but they did pick up many things from the Greeks, most notably among those they picked up sculpture. Greeks were obviously very well known for their sculpture. Now, they were different in a sense. Greek sculpture was more focused on an emphasis of beauty and an expression of beauty and what is, most wonderful in the world. Roman sculpture was more commonly used for educational purposes or to tell some sort of story. You'll find that as something of a difference between Romans and Greeks in general is that Romans often tended to look at the usefulness of something. So how useful could something be? And for that reason, they made great engineers, which we'll explore in our next video. Whereas the Greeks were much more artistic in their endeavors. But that being said, the Romans did have some common forms of art that were well known and renowned, and you would often find these forms of art either on public buildings or located in the villas of the wealthy estates in the countrysides. A very common form of sculpture was what we call bas-relief. So you can see that right here. That is where you have different sculptures basically carved into the side of a building or a pillar or something like that. Then you would also see this idea of mosaic artwork. Now, this was very popular in the wealthy Roman estates and would become even more popular in Byzantine society and Byzantine culture, which is the next culture you guys are going to study. But mosaic artwork is that idea where you take a lot of small pieces and put them together to make a larger picture, as you can see in the image down there. All right. A lot of what we know from Roman art, by the way, comes from preserved art that was recovered from cities like Pompeii, which were covered in volcanic ash. All right, next we want to talk a little bit about literature and learning, and specifically let's discuss philosophy for a second here. So the Romans borrowed very, very heavily in philosophy from Greeks and Greek culture. They did frequently read up on men like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. The philosophic idea that probably took hold most in Rome, though, was this idea that we know of as Stoicism. All right, Stoicism is this philosophy. It originated in Greece, but it became very popular in Rome. And it had this emphasis on living a very simple life, not saying a whole lot, not showing off your wealth or your prosperity or anything, but rather living a moderate life, all right? A lot of people believe this Stoic idea originated in Sparta, where again, they didn't speak much, they lived very simple, tough lives. And it was all about self-control, so controlling your emotions, and then also devotion to duty for your country, so patriotism. This very, very much would heavily influence the Roman legionnaires, so the Roman army, and then that would go on to live on in things like the chivalric code of the European knights during the Middle Ages. And you even see that now today in modern military philosophy, right? When everyone joins the military, they all get the same haircut pretty much. You all have to wear the same uniform. You're all expected to follow certain norms and duties to your country. That is all reflective in this idea of Stoicism. All right, so when it comes to literature, let's talk about that. The Romans were not very well known for their literature. They had a few well-known poets like Ovid, but really the most well-known piece of Roman literature is Virgil's Aeneid. Now, the Aeneid is simply an extension of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. It actually tells the stories of the losers of the Trojan War from the Iliad and how those losers would go on to move to the Roman shores and ultimately found the city of Rome. Now, when it comes to history, the Romans were also very well read. They were influenced by Greek historians like Herodotus and Thucydides. Probably the most notable figure in Roman historians was a man named Tacitus. Not only was he very focused on getting the correct facts, but he also had a very stoic bias. And what I mean by that is Tacitus was very, very critical of those Roman patricians and senators and emperors who were kind of displaying their wealth and living very wealthy lifestyles. He was critical of that. And he would often go on to blame those things for, certain downfalls in Roman society. All right, so in summary, again, as we've discussed, the Romans unified hundreds of cultures throughout North Africa, Europe, and Western Asia within their empire. And they brought a lot of their own ideas to those lands, and those would persist throughout time. Hundreds, thousands of years later, we still have a lot of cultural influence from the Romans. Additionally, the Romans were heavily influenced by the Greeks, particularly in the areas of art, literature, philosophy, and religion. And finally, that Greco-Roman culture serves as the basis, the foundation for what we today call Western civilization. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. I've got one more video on the Roman world that I'm going to post tomorrow. We're going to talk about some of the cultural legacies of Rome specifically. Hope you guys are doing well out there. Take care and have a great day.